that. All right, and Laura, if you don't mind, if you would think of your favorite cookie, and I'll ask you later what that is.
Okay.
You don't, but you don't say it now.
Okay.
Right. It's 7:30. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Just as we have usually been doing, if you have your video on, if you take your video off, and that'll maybe help out a little bit with the with getting information back and forth here. I'm going to turn the chat on. I think I have it. Yeah, it's there, and I see some of you are already there. If you have any questions during our talk here with Laura, please post them up in chat, and I'll communicate those to her. And she's, as I indicated, that she'd be happy to answer any questions anytime. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, good. Let's get started since it's 7:30. So welcome, Laura Pritchard from Indiana, Paris, Indiana, and actually lives both bi-coastal and spends her time on the West Coast and does quite a bit out here. And I wanted to read just a little bit of her bio for you tonight so you can see what great speaker we have with us. So this is from the website, if you haven't seen it. Laura Pritchard has lectured regularly for the San Francisco Symphony and the opera since 1996. She's the principal pre-concert speaker for the Chicago Symphony, the Berkshire Choral International, and Boston Baroque. She writes editorial prefaces for 18th through 20th century musical scores, was a finalist for the 2015 Pauline Alderman Award for outstanding writing on women and music, and the 2019 Kurt Weill Award for writing on contemporary musical theater. Laura holds a PhD in musicology and a master's degree in choral music from the University of Illinois. She has BAs in music and modern languages from Yale. She sings regularly with the San Francisco Symphony Chorus and Tanglewood Festival Chorus, the Boston Symphony, and has served as board member for Choral Arts New England. Her 25 continuous years of college teaching include seminars in music, dance, and art history at Cal State East Bay, which used to be Cal State Hayward, San Francisco State University, Northeastern University, and the University of Massachusetts. I have a new puppy who is just banging through the door here, so if you hear that, that's what's going on. The Boston Musical Intelligencer Center to Cuba in 2015, which ties in great with what we're talking about here with Carmen, as a foreign correspondent, and she has reviewed concerts for them since 2010. Was president of the Pacific chapter of the College Music Society and an assistant conductor of the San Francisco Symphony Chorus under the very famous Vance George, 1995 to 2003. Recent research includes invited lectures at Harvard, Oxford, Goldsmiths London, and NYU, and conference papers in Russia, Ireland, Wales, Hawaii, and Newfoundland on choral and ballet music. Lots and lots of experience, and we're very lucky to have you here tonight with us, Laura. And Laura's going to talk with us a bit about the novella that Carmen, the opera, is based on, that the libretto is based on, and some other things. And so I'd love to turn that over to you, Laura, and we'll ask some questions maybe here as we go on and as we get started. And please take it away. I'm sorry about this.
Okay, great. Well, first, thank you very much for having me. It's wonderful to get to speak about this. It's one of my favorite topics, the idea of stories and culture of places that are very diverse informing opera. So rather than having a simple story with a simple stereotyped heroine that just sort of exists in one time and place. This is a story that touches many times in many places, many different people, and many different kinds of music. So it's a really rich topic. So I'll be talking about some gypsy roots of the music for Carmen. And the reason that's relevant to the title is that Prosper Mérimée was not just a writer who wrote fiction stories. He actually wrote news reports early in his career. And although he was French, he spent a lot of time living in Spain and had experiences not only of very old Spanish culture, their beautiful buildings built during the Muslim time, Muslim rule of Spain, but also he found that there were people living all over Spain who were still speaking languages that can be grouped as Roma languages or Gypsy languages. So one of his pet projects was trying to create the first dictionary of that language. And there's some mistakes in it, but one of the things that he got interested in was the different cultural life of people of Roma and Gypsy heritage. So he didn't just write a novella where there were some characters of Roma background, but he actually did some real ethnographic research and language research and tried to create a dictionary. It was a French Gypsy dictionary, he said, a French Roma language dictionary, and tried to put a lot of authentic things into his stories. So I want to start by letting you hear what kind of music still exists today in Spain that has a blend of Spanish folk music. So it'll have a melody that will sound a little bit like Spanish music and elements of Gypsy or Roma music. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if it works here. It should say it says you are screen sharing to me, and you should see a YouTube screen. And if for some reason this doesn't come through very well, I put in the chat the name of the movie it's from. It's a movie about Roma and Gypsy culture from India all the way to Spain, sort of their journey across from Asia to Europe. And it's a movie without any text or story in it. It's just a series of musical episodes. So this is the last musical episode that they're on a hill over Cordoba in Spain, and they're singing a song that's mostly in Spanish called The Black Bird, El Pájaro Negro, and Tony Gatliff there is the director. So the name of it and the name of the song is in the chat if you need to do it again. So let's see if you can listen to some of this. You'll hear typical and see typical hand percussion. So some people will keep a steady beat, and some people will clap on off beats, and some people will clap even a third and a fourth rhythm. So it might remind you a little bit of African drumming, many layers of rhythm. And you will hear a typical scale of Gypsy music that's used a lot in Carmen that starts high and goes low, sort of an almost E minor scale. And you'll hear an element of kind of shouting in the singing. That's typical of Gypsy music, and there should be subtitles. So here's a musical example of some Spanish Gypsy music sung by Gypsies. Can you let me know if you could hear that? I know some of you have access to chat. Let's see. Looks like you can put your thumb up, whatever's fine. Okay. So,
Yes,
okay. So now I made some slides and I want to show you some slides because that way I can show you some art that exists in Spain, and I can show you some musical notes that help to clarify what I'm talking about exactly musically. So this is a slide that says Carmen, Romani or Gypsy, and romantic roots. And the word that they use in southern central Spain for Gypsy is gitano in Roma. That's what they would say themselves. And so there's going to be a lot of Romani and Gypsy roots in this presentation. First of all, when do the people come there? They come in 700 AD, they come in 800 AD, they come in 900 AD, and they're there mainly until 1491, 1492. And as part of the Spanish Inquisition, there are a lot of different ethnic groups that are told to leave Spain. And so many Jewish people leave Spain, many Gypsy people leave Spain, many Muslim people leave Spain, but some remain. So what this opera is about are the people that remain. You heard in that musical example someone playing a guitar, and a guitar is an instrument that exists in Gypsy and Muslim culture. The Arabic word for the lute, and you see examples there from Spain, it's a tapestry from the 1300s. You see a Muslim with a headdress, and you see a Christian with a little red hat playing lutes together. And the Muslim word for this is oud, a long-necked lute. And then the local Castellano-Spanish word and the Catalan word is lud or loud, depending on where you are in southern Spain. And that turns into our English word lute. So that is an instrument that comes from the Middle East, around the Mediterranean, and it exists in Spain and is heard as a Spanish instrument before it evolves into kind of a European guitar. In 1491, there was a huge amount of Gypsy presence in southern Spain, so much that travelers called it Little Egypt. And the word gypsy in English is thought to come from that word Egypt, although they're not Egyptian, it's a misnomer. And then in 1492, most leave, most Muslims, most Jews, and most Gypsies leave, but some remain. And we know, for example, there was still influence of their culture. In 1780, a Spaniard named Sebastiano Careso invented a kind of dance that he called the bolero, and that is the first of many kinds of dances that, if you study flamenco dance in Spain, with its clapping hands and its clicking wooden castanets, the stomping feet, and the very flowery arms, that is a dance that he said to him looked very much like a Gypsy dance. And if you actually go to Rajasthan on the very western edge of modern India, you find all those dance elements still present. And that's one of the main ways we have tried to assert as scholars that we think that's where the Gypsies came from. Their language has some similarities to the languages spoken on the edge of Western India, and the dance is very, very similar. So he invents the bolero, and then this dance style evolves in Spain that they call el baile, the dance, flamenco, of fire, the fiery dance. And it's actually adapted Indian dance from India and Gypsy dance from Gypsies. So when you see that in Spain, the far right politicians are like, this is our pure Spanish art, but it's really their most multicultural, multi-ethnic art. It's just been around a long time. So you see there the lutes that show up, and you hear the sound of lutes in Carmen. Sometimes they're harps in the orchestra, and sometimes more of a guitar sound. And the sound of the clapping evolves into castanets, and there's certainly a lot of wooden castanets in the orchestra for Carmen. This is a sculpture that was done in 1960, and it was meant to bring to life something written in 1613, a story called The Little Gypsy Girl, La Gitanilla. And so this modern Spanish sculptor sort of brought Cervantes' story to life. This is the same author, Cervantes, who wrote maybe the first modern novel, Don Quixote, also set in the same part of Spain. And the story tells about gypsy dancing at Corpus Christi festivals. And all these dates below are different dates that leaders of Spain made laws restricting the movement of gypsies. So in Toledo, there were 3 different laws. In Segovia, 3 different laws. In Granada, a law. And they basically say when gypsies could and couldn't dance, how they could move around, whether they could intermarry. And then in the bottom left corner, it says King Ferdinand, and that's the Ferdinand of the couple Ferdinand and Isabella, the same people that sponsor Columbus. He says, we'd like everyone that's not a Spanish Catholic to leave, but we will give a safe conduct letter to the gypsies, not to Muslims and not to the Jews, but to the gypsies, and they can go back to their homeland. And at that point, anyone living in Spain was their homeland. So they disperse somewhat throughout Europe again. Then there's a very small population, and in 1633, King Philip IV says there's too many again, and so we're going to have a ban on gypsy dancing in public. So this idea of the kind of wild dancing outside, and you see people holding tambourines on the left side of the sculpture, and a barefoot lady, and she's moving her arms wildly and holding castanets, and people that are, it almost looks like he's holding a cell phone, but maybe holding money, and someone in the back hitting a box of some kind. Loud music and dancing, a lot of improvisation. That was something that was a vital part of Spanish life for many centuries. Now, you just heard someone sing, and she was singing this typical scale. It's typical of flamenco music. It's typical of that first kind of flamenco dance, the bolero, and it's typical of gypsy folk singing. It's a descending scale, and it's basically a white note scale starting on E. So if you sang this scale, you would start every phrase up high, and you'd go, and you heard her doing that. She was going, and then she would add words at the end of the phrase. That's a very common melody, and in that Black Bird song that you were hearing, that's about 200 years old but has evolved to have some modern lyrics, that melody shape is very typical, and you find it in Bizet's Carmen when he's trying to let Carmen sort of emote and be very loud and emotional and cry out. And then the most typical chord sequence you find in gypsy music, and it shows up as a very common element of Spanish classical music, is sometimes called the Andalusian cadence. And basically you imagine holding your hand in sort of 3 fingers in a shape on the guitar, and then sliding your hand up the neck. So you'd play A minor, and then you would slide your hand up, G major, slide your hand up, F major, slide your hand up, E major. So you can hold your hand in position. You don't have to move your fingers at all. And you're just going strum, 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 and your chord's going har, 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 har. You find that in the song we just heard, and you find it in Carmen, and you find it throughout a lot of Southern Spanish music as well. So those are kind of gypsy musical elements that show up. And I keep mentioning this because Prosper Mérimée, who wrote the novel that inspired this opera, this was really his kind of favorite pet project, was collecting details like this, interviewing people and trying to learn local words. This is another scene from that same movie that I just showed you. From the Spanish scene, it shows a whole community together. It's a 1993 movie, and one of the songs is an early flamenco ballad. So if you're interested, all of L'Autodrome, it's about 2 hours worth of movie, is available in bits on YouTube, and you can watch as they move from Rajasthan through Vienna and through the German part of Europe, through the Alps, and they end in Spain. And there are different locals singing in local languages in each of those scenes. So why Spain? Spain actually shows up in a lot of romantic opera. There's an idea in French opera and German opera, in opera from Austria, that one of the most exotic places you can get to in Europe is Spain. They are the exotic other, but you can actually go there. So there are a lot of classical pieces from the late 18th century. By that I mean Mozart's time, that predate flamenco, that try to set their stories in Spain. For example, if you look at the bottom dot, it says many 17th through 19th century plays are set in Seville, Spain. The Don, well, in British, they would say Don Juan, we would say Don Juan, or in Italian, Don Giovanni, or Byron's epic Don Juan, the story of the nobleman with bad behavior, sort of a Me Too type story, and his long list of conquests is set in Seville, Spain. Beaumarchais, the French tutor and writer to the kings of France, wrote a trilogy of plays, and Figaro, his main character, is a barber who lives again in Seville, Spain. And then Mérimée's novella, which started out as a short series of published newspaper stories that was made into a short novel, Carmen, is set in Seville as well. Now, we know a lot of famous Russian composers traveled to Spain, like Tchaikovsky, for example, and Glinka, some of the early romantic Russian composers. So it is the case that you find Russian composers writing pieces called Spanish Rhapsody and Spanish Overture and A Night in Spain, and even taking notes on listening to Gypsy guitar players and trying to put it into their Russian orchestral music. The very first time real Spanish bolero song was heard in France, which is where Bizet first heard Spanish music, was an opera singer who was from Spain, and he came actually to sing a Figaro opera. He came to sing Rossini's Figaro opera, and he said, well, I'll sing you some music from my homeland. I'll sing you some Spanish bolero songs. And he sang them in a Paris salon. And there was a huge boom in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, and 50s for trying to have Spanish singers and dancers perform in your living room for your friends, and to try to incorporate Spanish music into French opera. So who is the writer? Prosper Mérimée. He's born in 1803. He lives a long life. He starts out as a linguist and a translator. So he translates things into French. He's especially interested in Spanish poetry and creating that first Gypsy dictionary. But he actually lived in Spain, and he was a tutor. And he worked for the Montijo family. They said Montijo, actually. And he worked for the Countess, and he wrote back to the Review of Paris, Revue de Paris, in 1831, a series of letters from Spain, and that's the title, Lettres d'Espagne. And in these, he basically said, here's all the exciting, exotic stuff going on in Spain. He lived in Madrid, he lived in Seville, he lived several places along central coastal Spain, including Valencia. After he was a tutor, and actually the person he was the tutor of were the two daughters of the Countess of Montijo. One of the daughters married the guy that became the Emperor of France. So suddenly she was the Empress of France, and he had been her French tutor. So in 1833 through 1852, he was given a job through the French government. The Emperor and Empress sponsored him and said, we want you to restore all the great lost art of medieval France. We want to help, create cultural monuments that people can go to for tourism. We want you to rebuild castles. We want you to find ancient tapestries and art, and we want to put it all in the Louvre. We want to revive it because we think a lot of it's been lost because of the French Revolution 40 years, 50 years before. So the two pictures you see on the right are projects, his two main projects that were successful. One is rebuilding the medieval city on the border of France and Spain called Carcassonne, and you can go there and walk around and tour this whole restored medieval castle. It was really falling apart, and he basically rebuilt it from scratch based on drawings, supervised all the architects. And the bottom tapestry is probably the most famous medieval French tapestry called The Lady and the Unicorn. And he and the daughter of the Countess of Montijo, the woman that became the Empress of France, actually found this wrapped up in a pile of junk in the attic of one of those big old French castles. And they got it restored and re-sewed the colors into it, and it's now considered one of the best preserved medieval tapestries. And it tells in many different panels, huge wall-sized tapestries, a medieval story of a lady falling in love with a unicorn. Then the last thing, the thing we care about the most, he took a lot of these letters that had been published and he turned them into a story that he named Carmen. And that, of course, is based on a Latin word, Carmina, that means song. So the girl's name is the song and her voice is her power. And that came out in 1845. So where did he get the story? Did he make it up? No, he did not. Again, the Countess. In 1830, when he's living with the Countess, she said, you talk too much at breakfast, you're driving me crazy, please read the newspaper. And in the newspaper, he read what became the source of the story. So in his novel, there are 4 parts. The 4th part is just a long list of gypsy words and what they mean. But the 3rd part is a lot of the opera, a lot of the introduction of a gypsy-based, let's see, let me move this around. A gypsy based on a girl that he called Carmencita, Little Carmen, and it was set in Cordoba. And I put the name Carmen in black because he doesn't use the name Carmen in his story. He always calls her Little Carmen, Carmencita. And then the idea from the opera of her husband being this robber named Don Jose, he made him an outsider from Navarre up in the mountains, the borderlands between Spain and France. And then he also had a character, a love interest of Carmen, who was a picador, one of the people that was involved with bullfights. And the picadors have pointy spears and they annoy the bull and poke the bull before the matador comes out to defeat the bull. But in his novella, there's no Micaela, no young girl, there's no Frasquita, there's no Mercedes. All those strong female characters are added later for the opera. Now, the Countess Maria of Montijo, her younger daughter, Eugenie, became the Empress of France. And Eugenie married Napoleon III, and there was huge controversy that the French emperor was going to marry someone from a different country. And we have that right now. We have a president who's married to a woman from a faraway land, but we're living in the 21st century. That's just not the most controversial thing about the leader of the country at this point. But you can imagine at that time, if that was shocking to the French populace, they were very annoyed that she spent a lot of time filling the French palaces in Paris with art from her home country. So to be sort of like if we right now had a lot of press and we were really upset that the current First Lady was spending a lot of money putting Serbian art into the White House and spending a lot of time having dancing groups from Central Europe come rather than American culture. And that was a big issue in the press at the time. It was a very political marriage. And so the fact that there was an opera being put on in the brand new French Opera House, and it was once again set in Spain, where the Empress was from, was a huge controversial thing. And there were some protests about that. You know, why can't we have a French story with a French character? Why are we doing this sort of exotic Spanish thing? And so this picture is a drawing of Napoleon III on the left, Eugenie sitting next to him, the Spanish princess. Then Victoria, Queen Victoria of England, and her husband Albert, all sitting together in a room that's them getting ready to go to the box and watch the premiere of Carmen. And so they were great friends, and the work, of course, did not have subtitles. So you could argue Napoleon III understood the French very well, Eugenie somewhat well, depending on how good a tutor that Prosper Mérimée had been. And then Victoria had studied French, but her first languages were German and English, and Albert's first language was German. So it was a very international bunch enjoying this exotic opera set in Gypsy Spain. Okay, let's see. I told you about how Spanish music was first heard in Paris. This is Manuel Garcia, and he's dressed up as Othello, the Moor of Venice, to sing an Othello opera, but he's the one that brought Spanish song to Paris. And on the right, this is a picture of what a salon would have looked like, where he might have shown up and performed. He became a really famous opera star. He premiered several operas, the tenor parts by Rossini, and his children became opera stars as well. And he actually traveled to New York in the 1830s and performed operas there, Mozart's operas and Rossini's operas. So you see him in the picture on the left, and you see the salon of his daughter, who became a famous soprano and had a huge salon where she would invite the leading Parisians of the day. And this is where music from Cuba could be heard, music from the Basque area in northern Spain could be heard, gypsy songs, flamenco songs, all kinds of fun exotic things, because their family was part Spanish and part French. Now, there is a song that's called the Habanera that is probably familiar to you if you've already watched Carmen, and that is the chromatic melody that Carmen sings when she's singing that she is powerful and cannot be subdued. And that's actually not a piece by Bizet, it's just a cover. He copied the melody pretty much exactly from a man named Sébastien Iradier. And his name in Spain his nickname was the second line, El Dandy Vasco, the Basque dandy from the Basque mountain areas in northern Spain. And his song was called El Arreglito. And he was actually a friend of Merimee's. He was the singing teacher of that same family, the Montijos, and he traveled to Cuba. So when the song is called the Habanera, the song from Havana, they're talking about the bass line in the background, the bum, 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 and that kind of rhythm, bum, 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 bum. That's a Cuban rhythm, Afro-Cuban rhythm actually. And his song, El Arreglito, was sung in a studio by Manuel Garcia in 1863. And so it was very well known. There's a drawing and a photo of him sort of looking like a cowboy. You know, the Basques were considered kind of the wild mountain men of the time from northern Spain. So Bizet knew this song, and pretty much everybody over 30 in the audience knew this song. So they would have heard it with pleasure, just like if you heard a cover of an old pop song from the 60s, and they would have hummed along with it. But the words were changed for Carmen. So here's a little bit of the original song on the top. So you have, in the original song, it goes, Chinita mia ven por aquí, que tú ya sabes que muero por ti. So it starts out the same with that chromatic descending line, and then it ends a little more simply. And then she goes, no, 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 no. So Bizet does change it a little bit, and he works with the librettists, Ludovic Halévy, who is very well known, and Henri Meillac, and they put these words on it for Carmen. You can see the same melody in the same key underneath, and she's singing in French. L'amour est un oiseau rebelle. That part sounds like the original tune. And then Bizet changes it, and he goes, que nul ne peut apprivoiser. And then she does it again. Instead of saying no, 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 she sings, et c'est bien avant qu'on l'appelle, si lui convient de refuser. And so there you have that kind of couplet that's very typical of French poetry. The word apprivoiser with the S-E-R here rhymes with the refuser. Little rhyming pairs of poetry, and that's also typical of Spanish song. So you take a song that's popular and kind of a folk song that's got some Cuban elements and some Basque cowboy elements, and you retext it. And here's what she's singing. The l'amour, she says, love, et un oiseau, is a wild bird. The rebelle is usually translated wild, but I'd argue the rebel part is part of her gypsy identity. Love, or she, is a rebel. Que nul ne peut, so which nobody cannot apprivoiser, tame or control. And then she says, et c'est, so, and it is, bien, it's good. En vain qu'on l'appelle, that it calls out. It's good, but there's no point in it calling out, that you call to love, because love, s'il lui convient de refuser. Love's not going to hear you, love's going to refuse you. So don't appeal to love. Love's just going to happen to you, and you can't control it, and you can't defeat it. So the text is part of her character. Now, the fact that they have her in the original story working in a cigarette factory is based on a real cigarette factory. So on the top, you have the plan of the cigarette factory. It's one of the biggest surviving buildings from medieval Seville, and that's sort of the plan of it. You have the city wall, the Muralla Ciudad there in front of it. And it was a factory where only women were allowed to work. It was one of the highest paying jobs for women in Seville. They had women police guarding them, and they could come out at lunch into the square and smoke and eat. And then mostly men would come and they would observe them and whistle at them. Soldiers would come by. And so that's a really important opening scene of the original of the opera. It's called the factory, the Royal Factory, Real Fábrica de Tabacos, and they're rolling cigarettes. So all the girls smoke cigarettes, and they show they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power, and they're wasting all of these cigarettes and cigarrillos that the men are going to have to pay for. And that building now is part of the University of Seville. If you go to Seville, you can tour it. You can go right inside where Carmen and her friends rolled cigarettes. Here's a painting of what the workplace looked like. And one of my favorite movies in high school was a movie called 9 to 5, which is sort of a comedy movie. Dolly Parton was in it, wrote songs for it, because it was about women. What would workplaces be like if women took over them? And so it's like a comedy movie. And the women set their own hours, and the women bring their babies to work, and the women decorate the area as they want, and the women eat while they're working. And that's exactly what this factory was like. This is a painting just from a few years later, and you show women bringing their children to work, and you show women eating while they're doing their work, and you show a woman down in the left corner with tobacco leaves, and you see people coming into work and leaving work, and there are no men at all. It's a very safe sort of unisex environment where all the women are powerful, all the floor bosses are women, and that was the environment that Carmen thrived in and kind of defined her personality. Bizet, the composer, certainly made a lot of changes, and his orchestration is one of the most amazing things about it, how it shifts back and forth between classical sounds and folk music sounds. And these are pictures of him all in the last year of his life in 1875. He actually died during the opening run of the opera. And there's a cartoon showing how he was cooking up Carmen in a little French dinner skillet there. If there's another one where this bottom thing looks like water that he's standing in, and he's fishing for female characters in the Seine. So there's kind of two different approaches to this. And you see him working on this. He was actually married to a very, very wealthy Jewish socialite. So he wasn't writing the opera for money. He was already very successful, and he had been the assistant and the replacement conductor for many leading opera conductors. So if he had lived longer than this very short time, he would be much more famous even than he is for this wonderful piece. As far as the tunes in it, some of them are made into concert suites, so some people just know the tunes. The opening tune is related to a trumpet call that Prosper Mérimée heard. He actually wrote out this tune, and Bizet borrowed from it. That's the opening. You hear that in the beginning of the bullfight scene. And then you hear a tune that sort of represents the men, the Spanish characters, and then it repeats. So it's an F sharp minor tune. It's a difficult key to play in tune with an orchestra, and it gives a little bit of a folk quality. And then whenever you have one of those powerful female characters, you have the chromaticism and the falling lines from the Gypsy melody I showed you. So this fate theme comes back many times. And so in this case, this is a cello playing it in the bass, that kind of very loud, totally with force, you know, going ba da 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 dum, pluck, pluck, da 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 dum, pluck, pluck. So that's telling you, you know, it's chromatic, it's shifting around, something is going to happen. Every time you hear that, fate intervenes. Then Act 2, you have a famous melody, ba dun 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 da 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 dun 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 da 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 da, and that's sung by the girls in the bar at the tavern, and they sing about all the different instruments that they use to entertain themselves with, and some of them are gypsy instruments. So you have zithers being plucked, you have guitars being plucked, eventually you have tambourines, you have hand clapping, and Carmen usually gets to come out and dance on a table during that, kind of establish her power. You will have later a talk, I think, about bullfights and bullfighting, and the most famous painter of the time that Mérimée was living in Spain was named Goya, and he loved to paint political scenes, but also bullfighting. And he has a whole series. This is him painting himself as a bullfighter in a bullfighter's uniform. And he paints a series of paintings of the life of the bull. So it starts with baby cattle being raised and the bulls being trained and the bulls being selected, and then eventually the bulls going to the bullfighting ring. So he saw the bull as a symbol of Spain, and the idea that you knew that the bull was doomed was part of the drama, sort of like Greek tragedy. So in that sense, maybe Carmen is a bull, and Carmen is the doomed heroic character that kind of symbolizes all of the power and the tragedy of Spain. Other directors now turn it around. They say maybe Carmen is the bullfighter and she makes the men be the bulls, and the men run at her and she sacrifices the men, and that's why there are all the knives and the sticking and the blood, and it has to do with the Spanish passion for bullfighting. Goya also drew and engraved pictures of bullfighters from memory. For example, he loved watching them do tricks, like they would chain, you can see the top picture, the bullfighter has chained his leg to a chair and he's going to fight the bull anyway. Some would leap over the bull, and there are some bullfighting arenas that still have this. It's kind of a Roman sport that at that point was about 2,000 years old, where bulls would run at you and you would leap and vault over them. And then you have the famous bullfighting song from Act 2, where they're singing to the bullfighter as he comes in, and then they basically say that over and over and over and say, watch out because someone is watching you. Love awaits you and you won't be able to defeat it. It's a famous opening. It has a lot of rich symbolism. And so you have to decide who is the bull and who is the matador. Now, Spanish dance continues after Carmen to influence French music. For example, here's someone at the very famous bar called the Red Mill, Le Moulin Rouge, a can-can dancer named Marcel Landais, and she's dancing a Spanish bolero in her can-can outfit, and that music shows up in a French operetta 20 years after Carmen, and the painting is by a man who used to sit in the Moulin Rouge, and he couldn't always pay his bar bills, so he would paint the dancers and paint the musicians, and sometimes leave his paintings as payment for his bill for the night. So this is actually a original sketch where you see a bullfighter character standing on the side, you see French dancers in the background, and you see a French can-can dancer dancing a Spanish bolero, showing that it's still very influential, this combination of gypsy and Spanish music that's become part of Parisian French art. The bolero rhythm survives. Remember, it's from the 1700s, and that's the and there's a variation set for orchestra called Bolero, written in the early 20th century by a composer whose mother was Basque from the Spanish border and whose father was French. And his name is Maurice Ravel, and he uses this rhythm in a snare drum part and some bass instruments all the way through his variation set called Bolero that was originally designed as a ballet, kind of a modern ballet. And so that's another example of something that survives from old gypsy Spain and becomes a part of French modern and classical music. All of these things also influenced modern ballet. This is an original costume kind of reconstruction from the dance version of Bolero. So I just wanted to put all the names here so you have them. That piece, the music is by Ravel, whose mother was Basque. The piece is called Bolero, and it was commissioned by a Russian Jewish heiress and dancer. So she could be the main character. And in the main character, She dances on the stage until she collapses, and behind her there are 8 boys who are shirtless with black pants and boots who stomp around and eventually collapse on top of her. And the choreography for the ballet is by a Russian. So you get a little bit of people from all over Europe contributing to another one of these Spanish pieces rooted in gypsy dance, in gypsy music, and the kind of art that inspired Prosper Mérimée's novel. There's also a funny movie called Bolero from 1934. It's a black and white movie, and Carole Lombard, who is not a dancer, dances around a bit, and it's kind of a love story. And they put Ravel's music in the opening scene of that. That's kind of a typical Hollywood movie of the 30s, early motion picture with sound. And the story of Carmen is reinterpreted as a Broadway musical with a mostly black cast called Carmen Jones. So it's done on Broadway in the 1943, 45, and 46 seasons. But Carmen is a modern girl from New York City, and her lover is an American Army soldier. So that's what you see in the picture on the left, kind of an updating of the story. And that gets done as a movie by 20th Century Fox in 1953. And Dorothy Dandridge plays Carmen Jones, and Harry Belafonte plays the love interest. And you can see all the boys in the background there in the yellow poster dancing with their World War II Army uniforms on. So it gets updated and made American. And instead of a Spanish gypsy, Carmen is an African-American girl. And the jazz aspect of the score gives it a little bit of American exoticism, like the gypsy had done for the Spanish story and the French opera. One thing that you'll see when you see productions of Carmen is references to the very beautiful mosaics in Spain. So I just want to mention that not just the music and the dance of Spain influences European culture, but also the art in these Muslim non-representational tiles you see in the floors and the walls of many buildings in southern Spain, these sort of gorgeous stone mosaics with repeating tessellating patterns. And you find modern artists like M.C. Escher, who became very well known for his drawings, going to Spain and being inspired by it. So in the bottom, you see medieval castle work. And in the picture in black and white, that's Escher's drawing of that when he went to the Alhambra. Same thing in the bottom left corner, you see stonework that's found in the public streets and the castles of southern Spain. And then you see one of Escher's famous kind of tessellated lizards. You have white lizards and black lizards and red lizards all wrapped together. And he said it was inspired by this particular Spanish floor in Cordoba. So you find that kind of interlocking pattern in the music, and you find it in the old and the current art. So that's a lot of different roots. Hopefully I've inspired you to seek out more examples of gypsy music. One of the reasons that I mentioned that I had done talks at NYU is that NYU is the first American university to have a whole department to study Romani and gypsy culture. So they're doing really cool conferences, and they're giving grants to people who want to do research, and they're inviting people, especially from all over Europe, to come and demonstrate Romani, the Spanish Gitana, and the I guess we'd call it Middle European gypsy cultures. So it's starting to get a lot more attention, and people are trying to do new dictionaries and really honor that kind of heritage. And that really was Prosper Mérimée's dream, to bring these kinds of stories and these kinds of characters to the modern mind, and to show that all these cultural elements are still alive and they're still thriving, and that Spain is not so simple as just the nation of Spain with their pure Spanish background, but a really great multicultural paradise. So that's my thing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I have a couple of questions, and there may be a few that pop up here in chat. If you guys think of some, we put them up here. But I wanted to ask you about the bolero again. And you probably said it, but I think I may have missed it. Do we find roots of the bolero in northwestern India, or is that typically Spanish? Was that created in Spain?
The word bolero first appears in the 1790s, and it's an official dance that's being taught that has the hands raised in the air, and it does involve clapping. So that part of it looks like Dance from Rajasthan, from northwestern India. The melody is kind of typically Spanish. The words to a bolero song have that sense of rhymed couplets that you find a lot in Spanish language song and French language song, and are main part of the way you would improvise song, for example, in Spanish America. Like if you go to Mexico and you listen to mariachis from almost anywhere in the main 8 areas of Mexico, they'll sing and improvise pairs of lines that are rhymed poetry. So it's one of the bases of a lot of later Spanish music. But the arm gestures and the stamping and the idea of clapping and castanets, that probably does come from India.
Hmm. And is there any relationship with the Afro-Cuban clave rhythm?
Yeah, so the clave rhythm and the rhythm in the habanera and the rhythm in the bolero all have African influence. There's a set of rhythms from African drumming ensembles, mainly from Ghana, that have been kind of documented. And if you overlap them and tie them together, you end up with the clave rhythm. But the way you create it is by having one person clap one steady rhythm, and then the next person clap another steady rhythm, and another person clap another steady rhythm, and then that clave feeling of the bum 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 that comes out of the overlapping clapping or drumming sounds.
Yeah. It's really interesting how that all intertwines. Nothing happens in a vacuum, it seems. Yeah. What did you think of the way that the character Don Jose was treated in the novella as compared to in the opera? That's one of the things that struck me the most after reading it.
When you read the novella, it reads a lot more like a CSI crime story. And the reason for that is that he had read in the newspaper about a woman murdered by her husband over a lover. And so he's trying to adapt that real life crime story that to him seemed very Spanish. And that kind of story would have never appeared in a French newspaper. They did not report details of grisly crimes and try to make the streets of Paris seem like scary and dangerous. And in Spain, that was sort of, the evening news. And it's a little more like our modern news, where you don't lead with the girl who's gotten a scholarship to college and the boy who has cleaned up the neighborhood. You lead with the protest in the streets and the looting and the fire and the burning and the violence, and that Spanish papers to him seemed really like that, really full of fire and life and violence. And to him, it felt very raw and authentic Spain. So he kind of takes the grisliest parts of the story and really makes the male characters the kind of failed foil of the powerful women characters in a way. They can't really stick to their guns. They're easily seduced by her. As soon as the voice appears, the power of the voice, the power of love makes their mind a blank and they're at her disposal, that kind of thing. To Mérimée, that was really a Spanish thing. He didn't see a French woman just singing a little bit and a man, forgetting his life and forgetting who he was and killing for her or robbing for her or that kind of thing. So
yeah. I liked in the novella that Don Jose was an outlaw before he became a soldier. I like that backstory, and that he in the opera he seems almost a little bit wimpy in the way that he is being manipulated, right? And
that may be because they didn't think the French audience would accept it if they started out with everyone being and someone outside of society. So they start with several people being sort of inside of society, and the little girl from his hometown constantly saying, "Be good, come back, come home, do what your mother wants," and that kind of thing. And Mérimée, I think, would have kind of laughed at that and said, well, that's watering it down a little bit for the French audience. But the original opera had a lot of talking in it. And when it got done other places in Europe, new music was composed to set the talking. So it made it much more like an opera sung all the way through. The original form of it was more like a musical. You had talking and then singing and then dancing.
And French society at the time was fairly conservative, right? That's why it was so
extremely
scandalous.
I mean, they had an emperor, and they were, all the soldiers were wearing uniforms in public all the time. And the emperor was going back and forth in a noble carriage, that kind of thing, and appearing in public and a lot of private gatherings. And it was just a very old world reinstatement of the pre-French Revolution way of living. France was super conservative at that time. So,
Well, I don't see any more questions. Anybody have anything here tonight for Laura? Oh, I have one more. Laura, what's your favorite cookie?
Favorite cookie is Snickerdoodle.
Snickerdoodle.
Yeah,
The code word for tonight's lecture is Snickerdoodle.
Or you can just write doodle if that's easier to spell.
What is a Snickerdoodle cookie?
It's sort of a tangy sugar cookie, and it has a little bit of cinnamon on the top.
Sounds good.
So basically a plain vanilla sugar cookie with a little bit of tree bark on the top. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Laura. It was really wonderful. And we very much appreciate your time and all of the work you put into this.
Yeah, I'll write Snickerdoodle in the chat. Yeah, Snickerdoodle. There you go. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a wonderful audience. It's nice to have so many diverse people listening. And I'll send you a couple of links in case people would like to listen to that original version of El Araglito that becomes the famous bird and caged bird song. And I'll send a link for the Gypsy example in case people would like to see more of that.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful singing and great presentation. And again, thank you very much.
Yeah, and someone said, what's the relationship between Romani and Basque culture? Romani are the Gypsies that move all the way across Europe gradually, and in the British Isles, sometimes they're called travelers. And so they have their own language that has some similarity to languages from India. And then the Basque are a separate language group, and they are a group that many of them right now would like to break away from Spain, so that they live in the northern central part of Spain near the French border. And they have their own language. They actually don't even say Basque, they say Euskara. And it's a very beautiful language. They have their own songs and foods. And a lot of Americans living now in the hills of Nevada come from Basque sheep herders originally. So you find Basque restaurants in Reno and Las Vegas. So that's a sort of a separate cultural group and a separate language.
Yeah, and Elko. I was just driving through Elko last week, and
Central Nevada.
And that is Basque country out there, which you would never expect, right?
Yeah, well, it's a good place for sheep out there. Huge open basins, very dry, very little mountains or trees, and perfect for sheep herding. So that makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you. I'll hang out here for a while if anyone has anything else that they need to talk about. And Laura, thank you for staying up late in Indiana. It's 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours here in the Midwest. So we will see you later.
Okay.
And have a great time.
Have a good evening.
Okay.
Talk to you later. Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
Where do you want us to write the text?
You know what? I have to create that assignment. I'll go in and do it tonight. So
okay,
it'll be there soon.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Just remember the code word.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Dr. Thompson.
Hello, Anna.
Hi. About the recordings that you wanted to do, I couldn't upload them on the Google Docs form for some reason. Is it okay if I just sent it to you on your Gmail?
Yeah, I'll just have to go in and do it. It's just easier for me if they all come one place. But if you can't get it to work, then I'll see what I can do to make it happen. It may be a formatting issue or something. So I'll take a look and see what I can do. Thank you for doing those. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Hey, quick question, Professor.
Yes, Dalton.
Hi, hello. So are we putting the code word on Carmen lecture number CSI?
Yeah, I just have to, you know what, I forgot to create the assignment, so I'll go in and do it. It should be up there tonight or tomorrow morning, and
Okay.
then you can just put it in.
All right, I'll just write it in my notes or something. Thank you.
Yeah, remember Snickerdoodle.
Professor, I have another question.
Yes, Mesa.
Would you mind explaining more what the orchestra performance is in this assignment? Would you mind explaining a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so the orchestra assignment, of course, you can't do the actual attendance at an orchestra because of our COVID restrictions. So I gave you guys an alternate assignment that's in Canvas. The alternate assignment is to watch the Metropolitan Opera broadcast of Carmen, and it's on demand. It's $5. And you get it for 24 hours, and you can watch it there. It has English subtitles. I think it's a really great production. If $5 is too much, you can always find it on YouTube and for free somewhere. I don't know though if you'll be able to find subtitles or not, and I don't know, which productions are there. But for the price and all of that, that would be a good one to watch.
Okay, and you want us to watch it and then write a summary about it? Is that it?
Yeah, so then just use the prompts in the textbook for the orchestra assignment. Use those prompts and write your paper from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome, my son. You too.
Mr. Thompson, I had a question as well.
Yes. Liliana, yes.
So, since beginning of the semester in class, I haven't bought the book, so I haven't been doing any of the unit and assignments from there. Do I have to buy it? Do I have to do the assignments?
Well, yes, you have to have at least 3,000 points in the textbook to be eligible to pass the class. Which class are you in? The 8-week session or the 16-week session? Or are you in my basic musicianship? I have 3 different classes in here.
Basic musicianship.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you definitely need a book for that. That is the core of the curriculum for the class that teaches you everything that you need to have for the class. So yeah, you need to get that. If it's a financial issue, then I encourage you to check with financial aid because they have some help there for students for textbooks if they need it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hey, Professor, I just had a really quick question.
All right, Samara.
I saw your announcement and you told us to add up our points and just see because 9,000 is an A. And I wanted to know, is the alternate orchestra assignment a requirement to pass the class? Like if we're over 9,000 points, do we still need to do it?
So for this semester, if you have 3,000 points in your online textbook, and you've then collected the rest of the points however you wish, and you have 9,000 points, you have an A in the class, and you don't need to do any more work if you don't want to.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.